Here is some background info on the anti-imperialists. So the anti-imperialists were part of a group of U.S. citizens who were against imperialism. They were known as the Anti-Imperialist League. So they began as a small group that met in Faneuil Hall in Boston in June of 1898. So this was shortly after the U.S. annexed the Philippines. However, the group grew to reach 30,000 members at its peak. So it was bigger than the small group that first met in Boston. So here's an introduction to the League. So the Anti-Imperialist League came together following the U.S. annexation of the Philippines. So this was mainly due to violent acts committed to the Filipinos by the imperialists. So the violent acts soon they led to a breakout of a war known as the Philippine-American War. In addition, they annexed the Philippines, or we annexed the Philippines without consent. So the land was annexed after the U.S. fought in a short war with Spain, and the Philippines belonged to Spain at the time. After the U.S. defeated Spain, the Philippines fell from Spain's control. So there was no agreement made over who would take over the lost land, so the United States chose to take it over. And then this was greatly hated by the anti-imperialists and the Filipino natives, because it was unconstitutional for us, and it was just uncalled for. But despite the fact that anti-imperialists did not have much power, they had protests, they made persuasive speeches, and they ran for positions in government. And for instance, a man named Carl Schurz argued against imperialism and described consequences of imperialist rule. Carl Schurz, so he was one of the lead members of the League. So he stated that if an administration with impunity ignored the issues upon which it was chosen, deliberately create a condition of war anywhere on the face of the globe, debauch the civil service for spoils to promote the adventure, organize a truth-suppressing censorship and demand of all citizens a suspension of judgment and their unanimous support while it chooses to continue the fighting, representative government itself is imperiled. So he was making it clear that the imperialists, they were very controlling and insular, to their own ideas and beliefs, and then their conservative control, caused, the war and violence, and it triggered discriminations and things like that. And they explain, and the anti-imperialists explain those outcomes and consequences well, and try to persuade the imperialists to stop taking over foreign territories. So some of the members of the League ran for a position in government, even though they were largely unsuccessful. And one of them was William Jennings Bryan, and he ran in 1896 as a Democrat against Republican William McKinley. And then he lost the election, but he was able to become the Democratic nominee for president. So unfortunately, they were largely unsuccessful. So if I had to give them a grade, I would give them a D. So they were they were only together for a short period of time before they dispersed, and they were only let's see what else. So they did poorly to try and stop the imperialists. They didn't have any effective ways. They held protests and made persuasive speeches, but they never fought back. And even though what the imperialists said were mostly wrong, their persuasion was powerful enough to seem truthful. So they just couldn't compete with the imperialists. Yep. And then Carl Schurz, one of the lead anti-imperialists, stated the man who in times of popular excitement boldly and unflinchingly resists hot-tempered clamor for an unnecessary war, and thus exposes himself to the opprobrious imputation of a lack of patriotism or courage. So he was making it clear that the imperialists falsely claimed and tried to convince Americans that anti-imperialist acts were unconstitutional. So they were like doing the opposite for their own stuff. And then, but then you could learn from this that that the anti-imperialists were not as effective. Like they needed to be more effective. They needed to fight back in order to take over the imperialists and return the country to the way it was meant to be. And like they should have gone to the Philippines.